Hey there, welcome back to Video Game Club Podcast, episode 7. The games this week are going to be a little bit different. We have a 2-for-1 video game talking about experience. We have Black Widow Recharged and Centipede Recharged. These are a couple of arcade remake games that came to the Epic Store and were given out for free. They're also there for money, but we got them for free. This podcast is going to be a little bit different than previous podcasts due to the fact that Tim, my co-host, is actually out of town. He's visiting friends in Croatia. I know, right? Crazy. He just leaves like that. Just like leaves me alone. What am I going to do without him? Anyway. Yeah, so he's out of town for a couple of weeks in Croatia. So I am going to be left to my own devices talking about these video games all by myself. So sit back, grab some popcorn, enjoy, and we'll get into talking about Black Widow Recharged first. So, Black Widow Recharged is a remake of an old Atari arcade game. Like I said before, you play as a spider on their web, defending yourself against various bugs coming at you. The web is an oval shape with a hole directly in the middle. You can move freely, well, for the most part, on the web, but if you get hit by a bug or any projectile or explosion, you'll die. Due to its nature of being an arcade game, it doesn't really have a story or anything. It's more of a high score type game. However, there are challenges which I treated as sort of the main bulk of the game. So this game is pretty much centered on killing as many enemies or bugs as you possibly can, gathering all of the power-ups to go along with it, and going from there. It's pretty straightforward. It's a twin stick shooter, although I used mouse and keyboard. Whenever you kill the basic enemies, they drop money. The money stacks up your power, which is like a huge web shooting in a direction that you're pointing. I don't know, it's like a big laser beam. It shoots out one big blast, and then anything caught in that dies. What I like to do is scoot over to one side of the screen because it sort of increases in size as the farther away it shoots. So scoot over to one side where there are the least amount of enemies, and then shoot over in the direction of the other side, and it'll hit as many enemies as you possibly can. That's what I like to do. During this combat, I don't know what you would call it, there are power-ups that drop from glowing bugs. The power-ups range from, shooting faster, multiple projectiles, explosions, piercing shots, and even simpler things like just making the game slow-mo so that you can dodge things easier or, maneuver around. Sometimes you have to push eggs or certain enemies into holes, or, just so if there's a fast enemy, you can hit it easier. It just makes the game much more manageable since there's so much chaos frequently. There are a few enemy types. Mosquitoes spawn the most. Power-up mosquitoes that give you power-ups, obviously. Hornets drop eggs and chase you slowly. Bomb worms that spawn from the eggs will create an explosion when killed, which destroy everything in the radius, yourself and other projectiles, and just about everything else included. And light beetles that start in a line but chase you if you hit them. What that means is that if let's say there's 3 of them that are following each other, if you hit the middle one and kill it, that means that it will, the other 2 will break off and chase after you. Kind of annoying because, obviously you're trying to defeat all of them, but if they don't follow a set path, you're gonna be having a hard time gunning them down. But yeah. The graphics in this game are very much improved from the original arcade. We're no longer, 8-bit or 2-bit or 4-bit or whatever it previously was. We're now in the neon era. Everything is very chic and improved. You've got solid lines just about everywhere. The entire web is made out of solid lines which you can crawl upon. Every time you move along said lines on the web, it flexes and moves around in response. So that's neat, depending on what is caught in the web and what is moving around on top of it or near it. So that's neat. Everything is pretty identifiable from a glance. Like, you can tell what's a fly and what's a bomb and all that sort of thing. Every time you blow something up, it's like a nice meaty explosion. Very cool and interesting colors, which is really good for this sort of arcade genre, because obviously you don't want things to get really boring because you're doing the same thing over and over. Obviously, there's certain objectives in the challenge mode, but for the most part, you're doing the same thing over and over. You're not really, you're not beating the level and then the game changes, or it's a pretty repetitive game type. So having something visually stimulating on the screen pretty much at all times is quite nice. So in the end, this is an arcade game. There's not really much to talk about other than, the gameplay it's pretty repetitive. It's pretty predictable. It's very interesting if you were to watch it. I'm not really engaged by these types of things, as I said before. But if you liked games like this or played it a lot when you were younger and you just, you want to kill time, this game is perfect. It definitely, it's very tightly made. There's quite a bit of, I think there's quite a bit of care that's put into making this game an enjoyable arcade style experience, like retro arcade. So if you're definitely into the retro arcade style of gaming, this game will be right up your alley. There is a co-op mode, but since my co-op partner decided to leave this week, I have no idea what that is. So if you've got a friend and you both have this game, by all means, you might want to check it out. It might be neat. I'm going to give this game a 4 out of 10. It's great for what it does, but it's not my cup of tea. I don't really see myself coming back to this game. I didn't finish all of the challenges, but that's because, I had a lot of things to do. I didn't really see myself gaining a whole lot by continuing to put a lot of time into this game. I feel really bad because obviously it's hard to give an accurate judgment when you do that to any game, but I don't think I should have to put 100 or 1,000 hours into an arcade game to really give a judgment. It's a great game for what it does. That's why it's not like a 1 out of 10. It's just not my game. It's not my cup of tea. I'm not the type of person that this game was made for. So, yeah, I mean, it's $10 on Steam. I wouldn't pay it. But if it was much cheaper, it might be a solid purchase for somebody who loves arcade games. The next game is called Centipede Recharged. In the same vein as Black Widow, it is a remake of an old arcade game, but instead of playing as the game's namesake, in this case, Centipede, you're destroying it. You play as a tiny movable cannon in the lower half of the screen. The enemies mostly spawn opposite you, and you're tasked with destroying them. And again, there's no story here, so we just did some of the challenges. Due to the fact that you're generally separated from your foes by a barrier in the middle, you can't just run up and grab power-ups like you did in Black Widow. Wherever the enemies are killed, they drop stuff. But you can't get there. So in order to get around this, they spawn a little spider, which might be an homage to Black Widow. They spawn a little spider that crawls around the bottom half of the screen that you can kill very easily because it's slow, and it drops whatever power-up the level is looking for, or, once you get far enough along, it's a randomized selection. Anyway, with your trusty gun and power-ups, you're typically charged to kill various bugs. Centipedes, fleas, scorpions, spiders all regularly appear to try and scamper down into your portion of the map. And if they do, it's not the end of the world, but it does make it more difficult for you to continue living because they will try and chase you down. And if you touch them, like in Black Widow, you die immediately. There's no second chances. There's no second lives. You do not take several hits. You die. And because your gun shoots forward pretty much exclusively, you have to wait for them to walk in front of you. So if they're, running around you, you can't shoot left or right. You've got to wait for them to return to the top of the screen or reset and go, up instead of down. And that gets a little annoying if they get too far. So you got to make sure that they are executed before they cross into your portion of the map, which, probably easier said than done on a lot of levels. There are barriers in this game, various things that block your shots. The big ones are mushrooms, poison mushrooms, and rocks. Both forms of mushrooms can be destroyed with a few shots, but rocks can't be destroyed at all. So if there are rocks that are covering up enemies or where enemies spawn, you're going to have a hard time killing those enemies until after they move out from behind the rocks. However, it becomes much easier because you can actually destroy mushrooms if the enemy crawls along them. The poison mushrooms, if destroyed, actually, I believe, make a small explosion. So if there is an enemy near them, they will die to the poison mushroom. So that's nice. One big thing to differentiate this game from Black Widow is that you can use your mouse to control your character's position, as opposed to having to use WASD to move around and then your mouse to point. Because you're only shooting in one direction, you can use what is essentially a mouse cursor to move around, which I think is much more precise and responsive. You can get out of the way quicker as opposed to WASD at a set speed and then shooting in the direction where your mouse cursor is. I like that significantly better. I think that makes for a much better gameplay experience than the twin stick style. I've never really been a fan of the fully 360 degrees twin stick style of shooting, just because I don't know, I feel like there's so much room for error, and I make a lot of errors that it tends to, I don't know, it just tends to be a little bit more I don't want to say difficult, but it makes it a lot more easier to mess up, and messing up due to mechanical self-failure is obviously much more annoying, especially if you're an old man who can't get better because you're dumb. That's me. The graphics in this game are pretty much the same as Black Widow Recharged. Not much more to say here. Nice neon lights and explosions, pleasant graphics from each power-up, and changes that are really, really noticeable every time you get a new one. This game is based on a grid. It's in a box every time with the various, things that you can't shoot through, like the mushrooms or the rocks. Each thing fits perfectly inside of a box on the grid. So, while you're moving around pretty much freely in your bottom half, everything above it is small enough to where it's, it just pops into the grid, and it's really nice. Again, very visually stimulating. Great for an arcade game. You want to make sure you're stimulating your audience as much as you can with explosions and sounds and hard hitting effects as often as possible for this type of game, because the gameplay is going to be pretty repetitive and routine, especially once you get a few hours in. So yeah, like I said, no story here. It's an arcade game. I'm going to say that over and over and over. But if I had to pick one of these two, I think this game would be far more interesting of a gameplay experience, far more fun to play. Like if I had one of these two and I was stuck in a room for 10 hours, I might actually find myself playing this game as opposed to Black Widow. Which I didn't really care for quite as much. But I'll give this one a 5 out of 10 because it plays so much cleaner with the mouse cursor effect as opposed to the twin stick gameplay than Black Widow. So $10 on Steam and Epic Games. Of course, I wouldn't spend the money, but by all means, if you love it, do it. So enjoy if it's free and you got it from Epic Games a while ago. Go ahead, burn a couple of hours. You probably won't regret it, but don't say I didn't warn you if you didn't like it. It is not my cup of tea, and it is kind of frustrating if you get to certain levels that feel like bullshit. Anyway, that's the game. Next week's game is called Firewatch. It's a, I'd say, more of an interactive visual novel in like 3D than anything else. It's a very story-based game, and I will be having a special guest joining us, so look forward to that. Anyway, thank you for listening. I will see you next week. Have a good one, everyone. Goodbye.